indeed an honor to have the Secretary General with us. It is the defining reality of our time. We all know that climate change is galloping ahead of efforts to arrest and reverse its adverse impacts. Global efforts to combat climate change and promote sustainable development are falling to abysmally short of what is required by science. Data indicates that tripling of existing commitments is required to stay within 2 centigrade warming threshold, and roughly a 5-fold increase is required for 1.5 centigrade scenario. Crossing these scenarios will impose irreversible consequences on the future of our planet. But the good news is that our Secretary General is leading the charge to ramp up global efforts. Last year, he convened a climate summit in New York to strongly push towards a transition from brown to green economy. The summit has given a global impetus to progress towards renewable energy, electrification of transport sector, and decarbonization of the financial sector and investment portfolios. The Secretary General deserves full credit for accelerating global action against climate change. Round of applause for our Secretary General. Now about Pakistan. Pakistan is on the front line of the adverse impacts of climate change. Consistent with the scientific assessment, our cities are witnessing temperature increase. According to Time magazine, Jacob Baba's extreme temperature could become world's new normal. In addition, data from Pakistan indicates melting glaciers, landslides, rising sea levels, heat waves in summers, and above all, smoke in winters. These impacts have serious consequences on people's health, efforts at poverty eradication, and collectively on the country's economy. Of course, put together, it has impacted the vulnerable population at the most. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the government of Pakistan, especially under the Prime Minister Imran Khan, is conscious of its national and international responsibilities. We are determined to implement fully our nationally determined contribution through our climate change policy and enactment of climate change law. Not only this, we have enhanced the overall level of public investment in environment sectors. Actions have been taken for restoring water conservation, land degradation, and for protection of biodiversity. Government is focused on ensuring that the current efforts generate green jobs and livelihood, especially for the poor, through their involvement in afforestation and ecosystem restoration. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure that today we have amongst us the Secretary General himself, whose role and work has and shall continue to inspire all of us in Pakistan and globally. His message that our economic, social, and political salvation lies in effectively combating climate change is critical. We look forward to his address to guide us in ensuring that no one is left behind in our local, national, and global quest to promote sustainable development. I thank you all, and I thank you, media, too. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellency, Mr. the Secretary General of the United Nations, Zartaj Gul Saiba, Assalamu alaikum. Let me first say that we are really, as soon as he got out of the car, the first thing he said was that I'm so glad to be here. This is my first passion. So we are pleased to have you here, and we look forward to hearing from you about the global consensus which has been awaiting the world so far and your efforts for that purpose. I will be talking about Pakistan's climate challenge, just quickly going through what our main issues are, and also looking at what Pakistan is doing at the moment to counter climate change, and then we look forward to hearing from you about the global scenario. Next slide. Do you have a pointer here? Okay, so Pakistan is really is not one of the countries which is attributing to this problem. We are less than 0.5% of the global emissions. But at the same time, where do you point it? Okay. At the same time, it is a very big challenge for Pakistan. Pakistan is a country which has been on the top 10 vulnerability list for the last 10 years, continuously. And this year in Madrid, there was a special list which came out which said that there are 3 countries of the world which have been continuously on the top 10 list, and we are one of them. And we have been number 5 this year, and the adaptation costs range to between $6 and $14 billion a year. That was calculated in 2010. And we have lived through catastrophes in which we have cost more than this for our country. Why is this happening in Pakistan? Well, it is, as I said, it's got nothing to do with our emissions, but it's got all to do with our topography and our geography. We happen to be a country which is the most inclined country in the world. We start from 8,000 meters, the second highest point in the world, and we go down to sea level within 2,000 kilometers. So that puts us almost on a slide. And we also happen to be geographically in this glacial melting zone. So this third pole of the world sits right on top of the north of Pakistan. And Mr. Antonio, in his role as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, has traveled widely in Pakistan. So I think, sir, you know the country, and this is the reason for our vulnerability. And when this adds up to this circle, which is a circle of the world's population, there are more people who live in this circle than outside of it in the world, and we happen to be in this circle. We are a very vulnerability that we have in Pakistan. Now, the stakes for Pakistan, as I said, we are the 5th most vulnerable country to climate change, but we've also calculated that if the world is going to heat up, and it's on the path of heating up at the moment, the world is trying to take it to 1.5 degrees or at best 2 degrees. But the bad news for Pakistan is that Pakistan, the temperature could rise 1 degree more than the world. And there is a reason for that. And the reason is, again, our northern area, which there was a report which was launched in Madrid, actually, which stated that that particular area of the world, which we share with India and China and Afghanistan, that area could rise 4 to 5 degrees more than the world average. So that puts us at a very vulnerable position. And on the other side, we also have a heating climate. We have an area in Pakistan, which you can see on the dark side over here, which could heat up, and these are the hot zones of the world, the hot spots of the world, where the temperatures could rise beyond livable limits. The World Bank just came up with a report this summer, and unfortunately, again, we are on this this list also of the countries where you could have the highest temperature. Last year in Jacobabad, the highest recorded temperature in the world was in Pakistan, in Sindh. So the stakes for Pakistan are very high. But what are we going to do about this? That is the main question. In Pakistan, we have created a number of policies, strategies. I served as the state minister in 2004 also, and we have stacks of policies. In fact, I was in Korea recently, and there's a book of some indicators, and I was looking through those indicators, and there was one indicator which said that Pakistan is number 1. And when I looked at it, it was the number of policies and strategies made but not implemented. So unfortunately, we've been on that list, that we make a lot of strategies but low implementation. And that's what we have to change, and what we are changing in Pakistan now. This has been our response to climate change previously. Totally denial, something that would go away if you put our head in the sand. But that's not happening. So that's when the change started occurring. Now, we have in Pakistan, and we are lucky to have him as our Prime Minister, somebody who back in the 80s, when nobody was talking about the environment, he wrote a book called The Indus Journey, and he dedicated it to the vanishing forests and the dwindling wildlife for Pakistan. He could see it coming in Pakistan, even in the 80s. And so when he formed this political movement called the Tehreek-e-Insaf, which is in power now, one of his first tasks was, we want to create a green agenda for the party. And it was a very challenging thing. I was lucky to be tasked with that responsibility back in 2010, but we created an agenda. It was the first political agenda for going green in Pakistan. And then we got in one of the provinces, we got the government in 2013. And the best indicator for that commitment was that Mr. Imran Khan at that time called me up and he said that, well, we have promised it to the electorate, we have to deliver it now. So get working on the green agenda. And we created some quantifiable indicators, and some projects came out of it. And one of the big success stories of that 5-year period was called the Billion Trees Tsunami Project. It was a project to plant 1 billion trees in a province which had seen deforestation occur for the last 50 years. So we set on it, and it was a big success. We went beyond the billion tree mark, and it was not us saying that, it was the global agencies saying that, WWF, IUCN, World Economic Forum, the FAO, all of them came and they studied the model, they studied the success, and they found out that this was a success which was happening, which had gone beyond the billion mark. I just want to put forward 4 points on why that success happened. The first one was obviously planning it properly and keeping it flexible. We had to choose between 2 options. One was to go and plant a new forest, and the other one was to keep on investing in nature, protecting it, and letting it, what is called assisted natural regeneration. So letting the forest grow back again. And we kept it flexible, and we found that, the nature part happened very quickly, very cheaply, and was the most effective. And we changed the model to do that. We had to have a zero tolerance against the mafia. There was a timber mafia which was prevalent in that province, very corrupt, and infiltrating all over the, even in bureaucracy, politicians, in the system, and there had to be a zero tolerance to that, which we showed. Transparency was the third one. It had to be, we were doing our own monitoring in the government, but for this particular project, we had an independent third-party monitoring done, which was done for the first time for any public sector project in Pakistan. WWF did that, and they gave us 3 thumbs-up reports. And the last one was that whatever we did, it had to be people-centric. People had to feel the change. People had to understand that there was a benefit coming to it from them. And we created about 500,000 jobs through this project. So there were women who were growing nurseries in their rural areas, youth who were growing nurseries, setting up small natural assets of forests, as laborers in the plantation, in the protection. It created a whole new economy, which was the important aspect. So I think these were the 3 things we learned in that 5-year period, that we had to engage the youth. Women, we found them to be the most responsible custodians of nature. And the communities who live in these natural areas had to take ownership for whatever we were doing. And at the center of it, I think nature had to be relied upon. This was the nature-based solution, which you had a full section on this government in 2018. Again, we had a choice. We were told that Pakistan, being an arid country, could become 75% desert if we don't do anything, if we just keep on going on business as usual. But we also had the other choice that at the moment we have 5% forest cover, but there is a potential, and the potential is that Pakistan could become 45% forest if we have the right policies. So that's when we upscaled the whole effort, and we started resetting our Pakistan's climate vision. Previously, whenever we had gone, I've been in the climate negotiation process for about 15 years, and we are one of the prime, victims of climate injustice. We haven't done anything, but we are the most vulnerable country. So we used to talk about that in all those meetings. But we finally found out that, we cannot rely on the world to solve our problem. It is a problem which has happened in Pakistan, not because of us, because of the world, but we have to take the lead in solving it ourselves. And that's when we started changing from this passive vision of being a climate victim to being proactively an enabler of the new economy that we talk about. And this new economy, which is going to solve the climate problem, inshallah, has got 2 main parts to it. One is the energy part, the other one is the forestry part. On the energy part, that is not something that our ministry totally handles, but our government has committed to a 30% target by 2030. What that means is that we want to go clean energy 60% of our mix by 2030. That would include 30% renewables and 30% hydro projects. And that's a vision which is very clear. We have unlocked that. Last month, 1,800 megawatts of wind power was, which was standard for the last 5 years, got passed. They are now projects which are going to come online. That's the clean part. The other part is the nature-based solutions. As I said, we realized in the KP province that nature-based solutions work. They are most effective, cheaper, easier to do, and when you help nature, nature helps you back. And that's the part that we focused on when we created a 5-point vision. This is the 5-point vision we have for our government for the next 5 years. It's very clear, 40% of it is nature-based solutions. We have the 10 billion trees. All the provinces of Pakistan are part of it. They have different models going from mangroves in the south to plantation forests in Punjab, and in the north to natural forests. We've got the Recharge Pakistan project, which is trying to use our flood waters. We get about 30 million acre feet of flood water going through Pakistan every year, and we flush it down into the Arabian Sea. So we are now designing a project to work on that, and we are being helped by the Chinese government on that particular project to use that water to restore the wetlands that we have, recharge the groundwater aquifer, and restore the whole ecosystem with that. And we also have the e-vehicle policy, which was passed last month by the cabinet. So we are targeting a transition to 30% electric by 2030. And this is something very exciting because it's got multiple benefits for Pakistan. It reduces the emission by 70%, reduces the running cost by 70%, reduces our import bill by more than $1 billion because our biggest import is oil, and also helps us in creating new jobs. We're also working on what we call Clean Green Index. This is an index to between 20 cities to make them go towards solid waste management and liquid waste management, and also waste to energy solutions. And the last one is the plastic bag ban. We have banned plastic shopper bags in Islamabad, which has been quite successful, and we want to expand it to the rest of the country so that we get rid of this menace, which is really something that is drowning the whole country. So this is a very clear vision that we have for Pakistan. As I said, 40% of it is nature-based solutions. It's got the energy side also. And then the energy ministry in Pakistan is to put our money on the table. And last year, this government, this chart is the local chart, the local financing. So the local financing for green projects in Pakistan has gone up by 16 times. The budget for Pakistan is 16 times what it was last year. We have committed about $1 billion over the next 5 years for our green projects. Globally, that's the small chart on the top. We were not getting too much money from the GCF, but last year has been very good because they saw a very clear, focused strategy, and we have enhanced that by 5 times. So now we've got about $200 million worth of projects from the GCF, which include very exciting projects. There's a project in which we are going to be setting up 40 monitoring stations in our glaciers to monitor them. There's a project, the first one of its kind, in which we are going to use the cattle waste of Karachi city to run methane buses, 200 buses. It would be the first zero-emission metro of the world. There's also a project on climate-smart agriculture for 8 districts that we signed day before yesterday with the FAO. So, the global, we've got a response from the world, but it is not good enough. I think if you see our commitment on the ground that we've spent, the focused agenda that we have, and the success story that we have on the ground for nature-based solutions, I think the upper bar needs to go up, and that's where we think, Your Excellency will be able to assist us. But finally, we've also done one more thing, and that we've set up a platform for partners to come on board this agenda. This basically is what we launched in Madrid. It's called the Ecosystem Restoration Fund. So we have created a fund which will allow, that's the agenda on the left side. Government of Pakistan is doing major part of that financing, but there are parts of that agenda that our partners would be interested in. We've had interest from a number of countries, Japan, Germany. I can see the ambassador sitting over here. So they want to be a part of this agenda. So we created a transparent fund called the Ecosystem Restoration Fund, which will allow flexibly a lot of partners to come on board this agenda. And I will finish with a small video which is going to just show you what this fund is. It's a 2-minute video, and then we'll look forward to hearing from His Excellency on the in Madrid, when we had a very stark presentation on glaciers. Does not go away with 8 countries getting together. The world has to get together, and
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, it is for me an enormous pleasure to start with this meeting on climate change, my first official visit as Secretary General to Pakistan. For more than 10 years, as High Commissioner for Refugees, I came many times for Pakistan, and in those 10 years I developed a love affair with the Pakistani people and with Pakistan itself. And that love affair came from the extraordinary generosity and solidarity that the Pakistani people has shown, hosting millions of Afghan refugees, sharing with them its own resources, and independently of the impact, the enormous impact in the economy, in the society, not to mention the impact of the Afghan crisis in the security of the country itself. And I had humbly the possibility also to show my solidarity to Pakistanis, victims. I remember visiting Azad Kashmir during the earthquake. I remember being with those displaced by the conflict in the north. I remember being with those impacted by the floods. And this very deeply felt solidarity has developed, as I said, a love affair with this country. And I feel that it is totally unfair that Pakistan is, as it was shown in a very eloquent way, is in the first line of negative impacts of climate change. It's not Pakistan that is creating climate change. Of course, there is a small contribution, but Pakistan is indeed in the first line of the dramatically negative impacts of climate change. And so I'm pleased to be with you today to talk about sustainable development and our common vision for the future we want, and the climate crisis, which is perhaps the gravest current obstacle to global peace, stability, and prosperity. Peace, prosperity, dignity, and realization of human rights for all people on a healthy planet, these are the objectives of the 2030 Agenda with the 17 time-bound Sustainable Development Goals. Agreed by all United Nations member states 5 years ago, the Sustainable Development Goals are interlinked and an holistic blueprint to end poverty in all its forms and to build the kinds of societies that we will be proud to pass down to future generations. The goals cover the whole spectrum of human progress. They target poverty, inequality, hunger, and health. They address key topics such as the quality of the education, decent work, a just economy, gender equality. They deal with climate change, with the oceans, biodiversity, and the natural environment on which we all depend, and makes natural solutions to be a central aspect of our strategy. And they promote justice, strong institutions and partnerships that will enable all countries to progress sustainably. And let me emphasize, all countries. For the Sustainable Development Goals are relevant for every nation and every community. No country can say that it has no inequality, or no urban poor being left behind, or no problems with pollution or climate change. And no country can say that it is immune from the global forces that will affect its success. Today's challenges to sustainable development and human progress do not respect borders. They are not confined to individual nations. They demand collaborative answers that recognize that we all share the same planet and we need to cooperate across borders and sectors to realize our aspirations. And I'm pleased to say that Pakistan has embraced the Sustainable Development Goals from the start. Back in 2016, Pakistan was among the first nations to integrate the SDGs into its National Development Agenda and recognize them as National Development Goals. And in 2018, Pakistan launched a national SDG framework to prioritize and localize the global goals through the country. And as with the goals globally, poverty reduction is at the heart of Pakistan's effort to leave no one behind. A national poverty alleviation program, titled ESAS, or Compassion, has been launched to expand social protection and safety nets and to support human development. And the National Youth Development Program, titled Kamyab Jawan, is seeking to create 10 million jobs for young people in 5 years. And stunting and malnutrition are down, and the nation is seeing success in bringing down neonatal mortality, thanks in large part to the Lady Health Workers Programme, which has been a significant increase in skilled birth attendance. And I'm also encouraged by the country's initiative this year to promote universal health coverage. These are just some of the many actions being taken by Pakistan and other nations to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Everywhere we can see progress, poverty and child deaths down, access to energy, education and decent work rising. But whether we look at Pakistan or elsewhere, we can also say the pace of change is not yet fast enough. In Pakistan, you are grappling with major challenges relating to HIV and polio, environmental degradation, and providing education, skills and jobs for all in one of the youngest countries in the world. And globally, the story is similar. We are off track globally, especially in the areas of hunger, inequality, biodiversity, and climate action. Gender inequality in businesses, in homes, in schools and in government, in the technology sector, is denying women and girls their rights and opportunities across the world. And vulnerable populations, such as migrants, young people and persons with disabilities, remain at risk of being left behind. Our collective efforts are not approaching the scale we need to deliver the SDGs by 2030. In fact, by some estimates, we'll only get halfway to our goals at the current pace. For that reason, we have this year launched a decade of action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. With only 10 years left before the 2030 deadline, there is an urgent need to step up action. And every nation, every community, and every person can and must make a contribution. The Decade of Action calls on governments, businesses, civil society, and individuals everywhere to combine to create unstoppable momentum for the goals. The recipe is clear. First, to mobilize everyone around a common effort. Second, to demand urgency and action and to hold leaders to account. And third, to supercharge ideas so that they become sustainable solutions. We need to identify what works and scale up solutions and investments so that we reach all the people on the planet. In all of these, the mobilization of finance to fill the gap of some $2.5 to $3 trillion a year is critical. In a period where official development assistance has been decreasing, together with private foreign investment in the developing world, it is absolutely essential that developed nations deliver on the commitment made in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda and the Paris Agreement. On the other hand, it's important to support developing member states in their capacity to mobilize domestic resources through improved governance and tax reforms. But the success of national efforts also requires the international community to be more effective in clamping down on illicit financial flows, money laundering, and tax evasion. At the same time, we need innovative financial tools to help in de-risking private investment and in the developing world to channel more stronger resources to achieve the SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe we can be the generation that ends poverty and hunger and conquers injustice and inequality. But it is not going to be easy. We face multiple obstacles. Geopolitical tensions are higher, and they have been for years, and unpredictable changes in power relations in a chaotic world are placing a strain on the multilateral system that has largely kept the world safe for the past 75 years. Global mistrust, due to the growing inequality and unfair globalization, is growing, not only between nations, but between peoples and their leaders. We also have to address the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution and make sure we embrace the benefits while minimizing the risks posed to human rights and equity around the world. But finally, and central to the discussion today, there is the climate emergency. This is the threat that I believe is most grave and most urgent, yet it is something I am convinced we can tackle if only we can generate the political will and the unity we need to make a difference. Climate disruption is a clear and present danger worldwide, but let us for a minute look at it through the lens of Pakistan. Like other developing countries, Pakistan has contributed little to the problem, yet faces disproportionate vulnerability because of it. In the past decade, Pakistan has lost some 10,000 lives to climate-related disasters, including 1,200 who died due to a terrible heat wave in Karachi in 2015. The Indus Valley is vulnerable to flooding, and low-lying coastal communities face the prospect of being swamped by rising sea levels. And currently the country is enduring the risk of a locust emergency triggered by climate disruption. Global warming is leading to global swarming. But the biggest worry for Pakistan is water. This is true for all the people of Central, South and East Asia. We rely on the water towers of the Himalaya. Pakistan's smallholder farmers, who represent more than 40% of the labor force, produce 90% of the nation's food supply and generate 75% of the country's export revenue. They depend on rainfall and on irrigation from rivers fed by receding mountain glaciers. In fact, 80% of Pakistan's water use is for agriculture, and it is under threat. Pakistan is one of the 15 most water-stressed countries in the world. As temperatures rise and glaciers melt, Pakistan's goals for reducing poverty and guaranteeing food security are put at risk. And Pakistan is not alone. The same story is mirrored across the globe. We see it in the droughts which threaten the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, and the wildfires that have caused so much suffering both in Australia and the United States. No country is immune. And that is why I'm constantly urging global leaders to act on climate change before it is too late. Sadly, after the success of the Paris conference in 2015, our momentum has stalled. COP25 in Madrid was a disappointment. Our planet is burning, but too many decision makers continue to fiddle. The only answer is decisive climate action by governments, businesses and investors, mayors and governors, and citizens everywhere. Gradual approaches are no longer enough. And the next climate conference, COP26 in Glasgow, governments must deliver the transformational change our world needs and that people demand with much stronger ambition. Ambition on mitigation, but also, as we see with the needs of Pakistan and many other developing countries, ambition on adaptation and ambition on finance. Every city, region, bank, pension fund and industry must completely reimagine how they operate. Our goal must be to keep temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. This is what the scientific community tells us is the only way to avert runaway climate change. And to do that, the world needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030 and to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And the main obligation rests on the major emitters. And there was a map that shows them. Those countries that contribute most to this crisis must lead the way, not least by phasing out coal and ending perverse fossil fuel subsidies. But all countries can and must play a role. I commend Prime Minister Imran Khan for highlighting climate change at the United Nations General Debate last September, and I congratulate Pakistan on becoming co-chair of the Green Climate Fund. And I also welcome the initiatives such as the 10 billion tree tsunami campaign and the government's Clean and Green Pakistan movement. I have to say that I was extremely well impressed when I've heard that Pakistan had decided in Islamabad to abolish plastic bags, and that will be the same everywhere. Plastic pollution is today one of the central concerns that we have, especially for the protection of our oceans. And sometimes people are a little bit reluctant of it, but for those that are reluctant, I have a solution here, which is to use bags like these, which is a UN non-plastic bag, to go to the supermarket. Such local initiatives are essential, and they should be reflected and supported across the planet where appropriate. But ultimately, the answer to the global climate crisis will come from global solidarity backed by global action. We are in a battle for our lives. Our sustainable future is at stake, but I firmly believe it is a battle that can be won. Technology is on our side. We have all the tools and knowledge we need to move from the grey economy to the green economy, as it was seen in the slide. We have the Paris Agreement on climate change, the Sustainable Development Goals, And we have the most engaged and mobilized generation of young people in history, a group that is simply not going to accept the current situation. The history of humanity is one of progress. I believe the trajectory is inexorable. So as we look ahead to 2030, let us look ahead with optimism and determination, knowing that we have overcome great challenges before, and we will surely do so again. Thank you very much, and best success for your program.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Ladies and gentlemen,
it is essential that the biggest emitters assume leadership, because obviously, if the biggest emitters do not assume leadership, our objectives to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 will be undermined. Our strategy has been, in relation to the US society, to work closely with the local authorities, with mayors, with governors, to work closely with the business community, the financial sector, the industries. And I have to say that I've seen an enormous mobilization in the American society to such an extent that the US has reduced emissions in 2019. 2019 is a year in which I believe the emissions probably have risen still a little bit, or been more or less at the same level after 2 years of increase in 2017 and 18. The good news is that thanks to the mobilization of the American society, independently of the positions of the US government, the US was able to reduce emissions in 2019. And we'll go on with the same strategy, working very closely with the different areas of the American society that are absolutely essential to make sure that the US always contributes to the battle that is essential for the planet to survive.
Okay, thank you.
I'm very glad to learn that their emissions actually went down in 2019. So I think there is action happening, but it's not at the government level. So I think this is something that would not be a roadblock to the climate solution.
Thank you. Next question.
The largest emitters in the world are developing countries because of the dimension of their economies. So it's not enough that the developed world delivers. The developing world also must deliver. And that is why it is so important to mobilize the commitments that were made in Paris, commitment of $100 billion per year to support the developing world, and to channel those commitments not only to mitigation, but also to adaptation. And I'm very happy that the World Bank, that has announced $400 billion for the next 5 years, has decided that half of it would be for adaptation, half of it would be for mitigation. And one of the major concerns I have in 2020, as we approach Glasgow, is to make sure that the developed world is able to clarify how these $100 billion will be mobilized. They will have sources, both the private and the public sector, but there is still an unclear, not transparent situation in the way finance is mobilized for climate action, and one of my main concerns is exactly to make sure that in 2020 this can be clarified. And that is the reason why the special envoy that I've appointed for climate action and climate finance is Mark Carney, that was governor of the Bank of England, and probably the person in the financial sector that has fought more bravely in order to establish mechanisms to guarantee that the financial instruments serve climate action instead of being an obstacle to it.
But do nothing is not an option available to us. We have to do what we can do. And I think that's what we are doing in Pakistan. We may not be doing enough, but we are not doing nothing. We are doing a lot and more than our share, and we will keep on doing it. And hopefully the Secretary General will get the world to get together in unity to do it also.
Pakistani agriculture in depth, I know a little bit more of my own country's agriculture. And I think that many countries in the world have a lot to do in order to improve the productivity of the use of water in agriculture. We sometimes still use too much water. I think at the same time we need to make sure as it was mentioned, there are dramatic floods everywhere. We need to be able to capture the water of the floods and to use it instead of letting the floods just destroy the soil and have very dramatic consequences for the countries. So there is on one hand the question of management related to, and this of course requires infrastructure, and of course requires finance, in order to be able to better preserve the water resources we have. And of course I'm very worried with seeing melting the water in the glaciers in the Himalayas. I mean, I was recently in another country of the region, Bangladesh. The risks of the coastal area of Bangladesh being flooded by the sea is terrible. And of course, one other problem is as there is less water coming from the rivers, the salinization progresses, and that is another threat to agriculture. But again, I think we also need to do more everywhere. As I said, I don't know very well the Pakistani situation, to do more to use water in a more effective way. We sometimes waste a lot of water still with traditional practices, and there are situations in which we practically are able to produce agriculture in the desert, I mean, with very well-managed forms of irrigation.
I didn't know of, I found out about 2 months back, that we have the second largest sweetwater aquifer beneath our river system, but we are drawing down on it very fast and not recharging it properly. I think the Recharge Pakistan project is that although you have this huge mass of water, 30 million acre feet of water that goes and we flush it down into the Indus. So I think this Recharge Pakistan project is to capture that water, restore the natural ecosystem so that it can recharge the aquifer, and then, the system starts coming back. So we are working on that. It's at the project is submitted to the GCF for its, feasibility. And as I said, the Chinese government is also helping us. And that's because they did it in China. In the Three Gorges Dam, they created two bigger wetland lakes south of that dam to recharge the aquifer. And I think this is something that we need to do in Pakistan.
Thank you. Again, the lady with her hand up.
Well, there was an agreement between India and Pakistan, and there is a system in which the World Bank the World Bank is involved, and obviously what I would ask the two countries is to have a clear cooperation in relation to water. And I have some moral authority. I was Prime Minister of Portugal when we established an agreement with Spain. It is probably one of the landmark agreements of common water management of two countries. Our rivers come from Spain. And it was possible to have an agreement between the two countries on the common management of our rivers. And I think this example shows that with effective cooperation and dialogue, all these problems can and must be solved. Because if one country thinks that solving the problem and letting the others in a bad situation, it's a good thing, it is not. Because in the end, then things turn against everybody. So it is clear that water must be an instrument of peace and not an instrument of conflict.
Thank you.
It is the critical issue to climate change. And with Pakistan and India, the problem is that we have this treaty called the Indus Water Treaty. It was negotiated in the 1960s. There are two main aspects which are missing in that. The first and the most important one is climate variance. Now, under the Indus Water Treaty, the water that comes in, there are two main sources, monsoons and the glaciers. And both are affected by climate change now. But we have not discussed this climate variance. It needs to be discussed. And the other aspect is the aquifer that I talked about. This is an aquifer we share with India. It is not a part of the treaty. So, because the drawdown is so large, it started getting affected. So I think there needs to be a dialogue on this, but, at the moment, there's no chance with what is happening right now.
Next.
One of the things that my new special envoy, that starts with March, Mark Carney, has been trying to mobilize in his function today as governor of a central bank, is to mobilize all central banks in the world to establish new rules for the financial sector to be able to disclose the climate-related risks of financial operations. Today we have a disclosure of risks for reasons that are essentially economic. It's necessary to translate the reality of climate into the financial risks. On the other hand, we have been working hard. I created a coalition of CEOs of especially asset management funds. We are working hard with pension funds and with others, and I believe there are many of these funds in Pakistan, in order to make sure that their portfolios shift. The portfolios of the funds that are working with us are still, at the present moment, are still compatible, according to the companies that they represent, to an increase of temperature at the end of the century to 3 to 4 degrees, which means that it is in the interests of us all that asset managers make a shift, progressive shift to the green economy in their portfolios. And I would say that, if I may be a little bit brutal, there is a good reason for that. It is clear that assets related to the brown economy, namely some aspects of fossil fuels, in the future, their value will inevitably decrease. And so it makes sense from the point of view, for instance, of a pension fund to protect the pension money of the people involved, to get rid of those assets that will tend to decrease in its value and to bet in the assets that will increase its value, as it is the case of those related to the green economy. I have made personally a small investment in a fund, a green fund, and I have to say that that green fund is growing much more quickly than all the other small investments that I made, which means that the green economy is now the good economy, and it means that the financial sector is becoming, very interestingly, a driver pushing governments to change regulations, pushing governments, because some of these things require government regulations, pushing governments to assume more clearly responsibilities in this regard. So I'm very hopeful that the financial sector will become more and more an ally in climate action, based not on, in some cases based on, I would say, even a generous approach, because more and more companies and banks and institutions feel that their staff is concerned about climate action, that the children of those CEOs are concerned about these things. So there is a shift that is authentic. But then there is enlightened self-interest. Why to bet in things that have no future? No. The logic of business is to invest in the economy that has a future. And the economy that has a future is a green economy, not a brown economy.
Thank you. Next question.
For solar energy, for a number of plants of solar energy. And they got in the proposals for that bid the cheapest price ever for electricity anywhere from whatever source. No, so it is clear, and much cheaper than coal and much cheaper than natural gas, that my country is closing the coal plants, one in 2021, the other in 2023. Natural gas will still remain part as a kind of a, system of equilibrium of the network, but the bet has been in the renewables. And they got now prices that are astounding. I think, if I remember well, $14 per megawatt hour. But these I'm not so sure, it's just by memory. Which means that, to invest in fossil fuel production of energy is a mistake for the future. It is to have more expensive electricity in the future, which doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, we see that in all other areas, the green economy is becoming the most attractive. So there is a pressure I mentioned from the financial sectors. On the other hand, in Europe 2 years ago, and I speak for Europe because it's my area, 2 years ago, all the elections, the key factor was migration. Last year, the key factor was climate. So public opinions are starting to put a lot of pressure on governments in relation to climate. And it's very interesting that because of that, the European governments have now committed, with the exception of Poland, but I hope that this problem will also be solved, to the carbon neutrality in 2050. Because the pressure of the electorate, was very clear. On the other hand, the movements of the civil society, the youth movement, is enormous. And I am quite convinced that we will witness in the next 1, 2, 3 years a much stronger commitment of governments to move forward. And I hope that it will be possible to translate it already in Glasgow. The key is the big emitters. And it's absolutely, more than 70 countries have committed already to carbon neutrality. But they represent only 15% of the emissions. The big emitters need to commit to the same objective. And we need now to do everything possible to make sure that the big emitters also assume that responsibility. And I think that there is also a growing conscience that in their countries that is needed. So we are not yet there. We are still losing the battle. But I think that the conditions are starting to be created for us to win the war.
Thank you.
But, as I said, we still need a clarification, and I hope that in Glasgow that clarification will be real. We are seeing also the mobilization of resources beyond that. We are seeing all the international financial institutions investing more and more money in these. We are seeing a big success, for instance, in green bonds everywhere. So I think there are reasons for hope beyond that. But one thing is clear, there were commitments made in Paris, namely by the developed countries. Those commitments need to be met in a transparent way.
Would you like to add?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I've always been strongly advocating the need for an enhanced dialogue between India and Pakistan, and even offered my good offices more than once. Of course, good offices can only be implemented if they are accepted by both parties. And we have been expressing very clearly the absolute need for human rights to be fully respected in Kashmir. By the way, if there has been any solid contribution for that, are the 2 reports that were presented by the Human Rights High Commissioner on the situation that I believe have had a very important role in clarifying the situation. So our strong commitment is clear. Human rights must be respected everywhere in the world, but also there.
Thank you. Next.
True that the UN has been clearly leading the global debate on climate change exactly with that same feeling of solidarity that is necessary to express. Obviously, we have an intergovernmental mechanism, which is all intergovernmental mechanisms is slow, but in the mobilization of the local authorities, regional authorities, the civil society, the people, I think the UN has been clearly in the front line. From the people that the feeling that you expressed can come. So these are things that, as you know, is an agreement that is not entirely mandatory, but I think that we are contributing to generate a strong feeling, a common responsibility of this generation in relation to the future generations. We talk about love. I have 3 granddaughters. I love my granddaughters. I wouldn't leave them. I wouldn't like for them to live in the kind of world we would have if temperatures would rise by 3 or 4 degrees at the end of the century. That would be a disaster. So if I want to take care of my granddaughters, if we all want to take care of our granddaughters and daughters, we need to do much more than what we are doing.
Thank you.
Understanding of climate change, but I think more importantly, we saw through the passion to solve the problem. I think that's what's come is waiting for the climate problem to be solved. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, and a lot of success in all the programs that you have explained to us today.